Hi, my name is Nora, and I'm 25 years old. I tend to keep to myself and don't go out much. Even though I have a job and I'm not in school or training, my family, especially my brother, might see me as someone who's just staying home and not doing much. So, how did I end up this way? Well, it all started with not trusting people, which goes back to my middle school days. When I say I mistrust people, there are many reasons, but for me, it mainly came from being ignored. I'm not sure exactly why, but it seemed like the people around me didn't find me interesting. I was really into machines, especially computers. I loved tinkering with them, and I was pretty good at it. I even became useful at home because of this hobby. But things didn't go as well as I hoped. My school grades started to drop because I spent more time playing with computers than hanging out with friends. My parents got worried and started scolding me. By the time I finished elementary school, they were asking, "How long are you going to keep playing with machines?" As I went through middle school, their scolding made me think maybe I shouldn't do what I loved. I began to isolate myself in my room after school so my parents wouldn't notice, cutting off all contact with the outside world. This made other people think I was weird or even dangerous, and I started to feel more isolated at school. My only real friend during this time was my brother, Keith. He was always good at encouraging me and helping me stay motivated. Thanks to his support, I finished compulsory education. Instead of going to high school, I chose to do part-time jobs that allowed me to work from home on a computer. Right after finishing middle school, around the age of 18, I started working part-time and used the money to buy old computers. I would take them apart and rebuild them from scratch. This hobby turned into something bigger. By the time I was 22, I was able to build computers that I could sell. Things started to change quickly after that. I began a business selling affordable computers, and I became well known for it. Now, at 27, I've made a good amount of money and can contribute $4,500 to my parents' household every month, with some money left over for myself. Even though I've talked to my parents about my job several times, they still don't fully understand what I do. Although my parents didn't fully understand my work, after some arguments, they decided that as long as I could support myself, they didn't care what I did. This agreement meant they stopped interfering with my activities, and I could live freely in their house. However, my brother, who had always been my ally and understood me when I was a student, started to see things differently. He used to be very kind, but perhaps he became frustrated with me. Even though I was now 22 and working, he seemed tired of me staying in my room at our parents' house, constantly working on machines. Eventually, his behavior toward me grew harsh. I'm not one to stay quiet, so this led to frequent conflicts between us, and our relationship became strained. Things got worse after he got married. His wife, who had been with him since high school, never had a high opinion of me. After hearing about me from my brother, she didn't like the idea of me being her sister-in-law and seemed to influence my brother's feelings. As a result of this ongoing situation, I became known as the plague of the family home. Even though I stayed isolated in my room, I felt overwhelmed by the constant negativity directed at me. It was a stark contrast to the concerned words of my parents. The home, which had once been a place of comfort despite various criticisms, quickly turned into a place where I felt like an enemy. I began to feel that my parents were being swayed, and my support system was disappearing. Despite having a good income and contributing to the household expenses, I was seen as a freeloader by my brother and sister-in-law, who didn't understand my work. They started saying things like, "We're going to drive you out of the family home," and plan to take over living with our parents. This made me feel even more estranged from my brother. Since they wanted me out, I thought it might be better to leave on my own terms once I found a new place to live. After all, if I were no longer living there, I wouldn't have to contribute to the household expenses anymore, which meant I could save that money. In a way, It seemed like an opportunity. When I was thinking about leaving the family home, my brother suddenly brought up the topic of inheritance. It seemed he had misunderstood why I was able to live comfortably even though I wasn't working and stayed mostly in my room. He thought our parents had money saved up to support us, but in reality, my ability to contribute financially was what allowed our parents to live as they pleased without working. When the idea of me leaving the house came up, my brother told me, "We'll take care of mom and dad, so we should inherit their assets. You should just give up your claim to the inheritance." He didn't seem to understand that the reason our parents could enjoy their daily lives at home without working was because of the money I was providing. I doubted they could continue their lifestyle without that support. To my brother, I was just a burden, staying locked away in my room. I was tempted to just leave things as they were, but I wanted to make sure I understood his stance completely. So, I asked him one more time, "Are you really okay with me leaving?" My brother laughed at me in a condescending way and said, "We'd be glad if you could just get out already." It became clear to me just how little he understood the situation. I felt sorry for him and his wife, which only strengthened my resolve to leave our family home. A few days after my brother's declaration, I was still holed up in my room. During this time, my brother and sister-in-law's efforts to get me out became relentless. They knocked on my door persistently, convinced our mom to stop providing meals for me, and even started saying things like, "Your own laundry." These were things I would have to handle on my own if I lived alone, so I didn't find them particularly troublesome. However, I wasn't going to just accept being pushed out without preparing some sort of response. I'm skilled with machines, and my brother seemed to have forgotten what it meant for me to have free access to a computer. I wasn't the type to quietly leave when told. Given that my brother's marriage and my being a shut-in sister were the only chance for our parents to see a grandchild, and knowing that my parents, blinded by this, approved of me leaving, I decided to set a trap. This trap would be activated as a response to the unfair situation I was being forced into. When I finally found a new place to live and completed all the necessary procedures, I decided it was time to leave my family home. Before I left a parting message for my parents and brother. I wrote, "I've been supporting the family and you've forgotten all the good I've done. I hope you realize who the real curse on our family wealth is." My parents seemed a bit surprised by my message, but I guess they probably thought my brother would somehow manage things in the end. They brushed off my words, dismissing them as sour grapes, and I was sure they didn't take what I said seriously. Despite their reaction, I thought it was best to move on, so I went ahead with my plan to leave. I took a substantial amount of equipment from the family home and bought additional items, along with necessary furniture and appliances for my new place. I arranged everything exactly how I wanted, decorating the space with my favorite interior design to create a highly comfortable environment. Living alone at first felt a bit daunting, but I quickly found that it was so easy and enjoyable that I wished I had made this change sooner. The locals in my new neighborhood were kind and friendly, and life was surprisingly comfortable. Since leaving my family home and handling everything on my own, I've been having a great time experiencing new things for the first time. Meanwhile, I wondered how my family was managing without my financial support. Then, I received a call from my mother. She asked, "Hey Nora, did you do something to our machines?" I was confused. "Do something to the machines? What do you mean?" She explained, "There's something wrong with the computers and electronics." I replied, "I used to take care of them for free because we were family, but since you treated me like a nuisance and kicked me out, you'll have to pay the regular price now." My mother protested, "You're really greedy. We're your parents. At least give us a discount." I responded, "Well, I'd rather give my friends a discount. Unlike you, they don't treat me poorly." My mother didn't like my response and hung up abruptly, like a petulant child. She even sent me a spiteful email saying something along the lines of, "Mean kids lose their friends." It made me question who the real adult in this situation was. Honestly, her reaction seemed self-centered, if not outright selfish. As for the family computers, I had only returned all the settings I had adjusted for free back to their original state. To someone unfamiliar with how the machines worked, it probably seemed like they had started malfunctioning on their own. When I suggested they contact a professional repair service, they threw a tantrum. But, given the situation, it was what I had expected. So, I decided to let things be for a while. 6 months after being kicked out of my family home, and just as I was getting used to living alone, my father called me. "I hate to ask, but could you lend me some money?" he started. I was taken aback. "Lend you money? What do you mean?" He explained, "Well, your brother and his wife have been spending money recklessly. They seem to think we're rich, and they're constantly asking for more. Give us money for this. Give us money for that." I was confused. "Why do you always come to me with these problems? I've heard of daughters sending money to help their parents, but parents asking their children for money? Isn't that supposed to be something you do out of generosity?" "It's easier said than done," he replied. "Even $1,000 would help." I firmly said, "I'm not giving you anything. I won't lend you money, and I have no intention of helping you out financially anymore. However, if you want me to work on your machines, you'll need to pay for my services." My father retorted, "You've really become stingy." I guess what Mom said was true. During my unemployed years, he used to complain that I did whatever I wanted at home and had other grievances. But I didn't care. I just hung up the phone. My father didn't send any emails, but he started calling more than twice a day. I thought, what troublesome parents I have. A few days after this constant contact from my father, my brother, who seemed to be in a tough spot, called me next. When I asked him why they were calling me, he said, "Can you tell me why our family home was wealthy before?" It seemed he had a hunch that their financial situation had deteriorated since I moved out. But by then, it was too late. My comfortable new home was where I had built my life. Both my work and personal life were entirely settled here, and there was no way I was leaving it. I reflected on why our family was once wealthy. It was because I was contributing $4,500 each month to the household. I didn't have to contribute that much, but I did it out of gratitude for being raised by my parents. Now, after being kicked out, why would I continue to support a home I no longer lived in? Of course, I wouldn't. "I see," my brother said. "So, that's why Mom and Dad's financial situation suddenly worsened." I'm sorry. Looking back, I realize what we did was terrible. I'm sorry, but even if you ask me to come back, I have no intentions of doing so. I understand if you regret it, but it's too late for apologies. I have no plans to be involved with any of you in the future. Don't call me anymore. Ignoring my brother's protests, I hung up the phone. When I left home, I made up my mind never to get involved with them again. It was inconceivable to forgive them easily. I decided to cancel my cell phone contract because I couldn't bear receiving calls about various issues anymore. 5 years have passed since I canceled my mobile contract and started living alone. I've since gotten married to someone who works in the same field as me and understands my lifestyle. He helps with the housework, which has been a great relief. Though I've thought about contacting my parents since they are technically my family, it feels too late now. I haven't reached out to them, but my husband has expressed a desire to meet them and is curious about their current situation. After severing ties with my family, I decided to hire a private detective to look into their situation. The findings were quite shocking. After I cut off contact, my parents became desperate to maintain their lifestyle and keep my brother and his wife tied to the family home. They started borrowing money from various lenders, but the mounting debt quickly became unmanageable. The loans, which they had no hope of repaying, accumulated massive interest, leaving them in a dire financial situation. When I reviewed the detective's report, I learned that the debt my parents had accumulated exceeded $200,000. They had used the house as collateral for these loans, and as a result, the property was seized. The once familiar family home was now a vacant lot. Although I felt a pang of sadness due to my attachment to the house, I came to the conclusion that they were reaping what they had sown. I decided to look into my brother's situation as well. It seemed that his marriage was on the rocks. He had suggested divorce due to his wife's extravagant spending habits, but she refused to accept it. They were entangled in a costly and protracted divorce lawsuit. His wife had hired a lawyer and was fiercely resisting the separation, creating a standoff. They didn't have any children, and rumors suggested that my brother might be infertile. Concerned, I had the detective visit the hospital where my brother and his wife were receiving treatment. It turned out that he was indeed infertile, with the doctors indicating that natural conception was nearly impossible. My parents, who had hoped for a grandchild from my brother and had kicked me out when that hope wasn't realized, were undoubtedly disappointed. They eventually had to sell the family home to pay off the debt. The state of my family was truly dismal. This distressing situation was apparent from a preliminary investigation. It was clear that reconnecting with them would not be beneficial for either me or my husband. I now have a kind and supportive husband, for children, and a dog. We live in a large home and are enjoying a life that my family could only have dreamed of. If my family knew about my current success, I feared they might try to take advantage of it. To protect myself and my family, I went to the local office and arranged for my personal information to be restricted. I made sure that there were no personal disclosure requests that could reveal my whereabouts or current situation. I also requested that my husband and I maintain our distance from them. My husband was initially disappointed when I explained why we wouldn't be introducing them to our life, but he understood after I detailed the situation and has supported my decision. For now, my focus is on maintaining my peace and enjoying the life I've built. Perhaps in the future, when things settle down and there's a possibility for reconciliation, I might reconsider reaching out to my parents and brother. For now, though, I believe it's best to keep things as they are. After deciding to cut off contact with my family, I took a step further and hired a private detective to investigate their situation. The results were startling. My parents, unable to maintain their accustomed lifestyle and desperate to keep my brother and his wife tied to the family home, had begun borrowing money from various lenders. They accumulated an enormous amount of debt, borrowing far beyond their means and with no hope of repayment. The loans quickly accrued interest, exacerbating their financial troubles. When I reviewed the findings from the detective, I was dismayed to discover that the debt my parents had amassed exceeded $200,000. They had used the family home as collateral for these loans, and the mounting debt led to the seizure of the property. The once familiar family home was now nothing more than a vacant lot. Although I felt a deep sadness at the loss of the place I once called home, I had to acknowledge that the situation was the result of their own choices and actions. I was also curious about my brother's circumstances, so I delved deeper into his situation. It became apparent that his marriage was in serious trouble. He had proposed a divorce due to his wife's extravagant spending, but she refused to accept it. Their divorce proceedings were fraught with conflict, and his wife had hired a lawyer, resulting in a prolonged and contentious legal battle. The situation was financially draining and emotionally exhausting for both parties. Further investigation revealed that my brother and his wife did not have any children, which added to the tension. Rumors suggested that my brother might be infertile, and to verify this, I instructed the detective to look into his medical records. The detective confirmed that my brother was indeed infertile, with doctors indicating that natural conception was nearly impossible. This revelation was likely a significant factor in the strain on his marriage and his wife's refusal to divorce. My parents, who had harbored hopes of a grandchild from my brother, were undoubtedly disheartened. Their dreams of expanding the family were dashed, and as a result, their financial situation deteriorated further. They eventually had to sell the family home to settle the debts, leaving them in a state of financial ruin. The gravity of their situation was evident from a thorough investigation. It was clear that reconnecting with them would be disadvantageous for both me and my husband. I now enjoy a fulfilling life with my supportive husband, for children, and a dog. We live in a spacious, beautiful home and are thriving in a way that my family could only have imagined. If my family were to learn about our success, I feared they might try to exploit our good fortune. To safeguard my family and myself, I went to the local office and arranged for my personal information to be restricted. I ensured that my whereabouts and current situation remained confidential. I also made it clear to my husband that we would keep our distance from my family. Although he was initially disappointed by the decision to not introduce them to our life, he understood my reasoning after I explained the situation and supported my choice. For the time being, my focus is on enjoying the life I have built and maintaining my peace. While I am open to the possibility of reconciliation in the future, when things have calmed down and if the opportunity arises, I feel that it's best to keep things as they are for now. My priority is to protect my family and preserve the happiness we have worked so hard to achieve.